Welcome to Say More from Boston Globe Opinion. I'm Shirley Leung. The economy. It's a topic that touches almost every aspect of our lives, but these are confusing times we live in. That's why I appreciate journalists who make sense of what's going on. Here at the Boston Globe, no one does it better than Larry Edelman, author of the Globe's popular Trend Lines newsletter. In his work, Larry covers the trends shaping business and the economy in Boston and beyond. I wanted to invite him on Say More for a vibe check on the economy as we close out 2025. Welcome, Larry.
Hey, Shirley. Thanks for having me.
So excited. This is your first time on the show.
It's about time, huh?
That's right. So Larry, as we wrap up 2025, how would you describe the mood for economy watchers? I mean, do you think we're still in this kind of vibe-cession, where the economic data doesn't quite, indicates things are okay, but consumers feel like the economy is bad?
Yeah, I think that's exactly how people are feeling. I would call the mood, at least my mood, cautiously pessimistic. I don't think things are going to fall apart, but they are slowing down and continuing to slow down as we head into the new year.
So every time a new year rolls out, those of us who follow business are always bracing for a recession, right? The R word.
Mm-hmm.
And the only time I was right about the recession was in 2020. But that's because COVID shut down the economy and everybody went home. But every year since then, I have been wrong. Even this year with all those tariffs at the beginning of the year, completely wrong. No recession. So as I say it, like my economic spidey sense has been off. So will there be a recession in 2026?
Most economists don't see a recession coming in 2026, at least not now. Bloomberg has this index that they keep in which they predict a recession, and it's at 30%, which is pretty low. During the Liberation Day tariffs and right after that, it shot up to 40%.
Oh, wow.
But now it's back down to 30%. So there's no alarms going off about an imminent recession.
Is that surprising to you?
In some ways, yes, but in some ways, no, because the economy is still pretty good in certain ways. There are still jobs being created. As we saw in the job numbers, 65,000 new jobs were added in the month of November. So employers are still hiring, but it's just not at the same pace that we saw earlier in the year.
So let's say in the event that the economy does slip into a recession in 2026, I mean, what would it look like? I mean, the one that I remember, set aside 2020, right, during the pandemic, that was kind of once in a lifetime. But the one I remember is the Great Recession, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of home foreclosures. I mean, is that what will look like, or will it look very different?
Well, it's always hard to say. At this point in time, barring a major shock, I don't think you'll see something anywhere near the scale of the Great Recession. I think what it'll look like is right now we're in something they call the low hire, low fire mode. And what will happen is it'll go to no hire, more fire. More people getting laid off.
I haven't heard that before.
I just made it up. That's why.
That's pretty good. I need to read that in your next column.
Okay, I'll find a way to get it in. But so, it'll be like kind of the air coming out of a balloon.
I want to go back to this idea of vibe-cession, right? So the numbers aren't so bad, but people are hunkering down, it seems like. And so why is there a big disconnect between the economic data and how people the disconnect between Wall Street, I mean, the stock market is near records, right? And Main Street.
We always talk about the economy. There are actually multiple economies, and it really depends on where you sit in that economy. Mm-hmm. For the upper third of households by income, things are pretty good because the stock market is high, and that gives people a lot of confidence. Their bank accounts are growing, their IRAs are growing.
And as long as they have a job, right?
Exactly. If you're in the middle third, things are a little tenser. Mm-hmm. You have a job, but maybe your company is really slowing down, not hiring anymore, and you're worried about your paycheck. And for the bottom third, things are bad, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're in that low hire mode, so it's not easy to find a job.
Hmm.
Right after the pandemic lifted, the hiring, people couldn't hire fast enough.
Right.
Now it's a very slow rate of hiring, and also interest rates are high,
Mm.
so that adds to debt burden.
Hmm.
People's credit card bills. They owe more if they're not paying the whole thing off. So that's why you see this difference in views of the economy, because people are in different places.
Hmm. So, and besides the job numbers, what economic indicators are you paying a lot of attention to?
Well, jobs is obviously number one, but then you also look at consumer spending, because consumer spending fuels 70% of the
That's
economy,
right.
and that's holding up so far.
Which is also surprising. You think that, if there are a lot of people who don't feel good, they're not going to go shopping. But I guess it seems like we're shopping our blues away or something like
That's
that.
correct. But if you listen to the retailers on their conference
Yeah.
calls with analysts after earnings, they are noting a bifurcation in
Mm,
consumer spending.
hmm.
That like the WalMarts of the world that cater to middle and lower income consumers are seeing them hunker down,
Mm,
whereas the higher end consumer is still spending a lot.
mm. And so beyond consumer spending, anything else that?
Inflation.
Mm,
Inflation's not dead yet.
hmm.
We're running at 3%, which is still elevated. The Fed really targets 2% over the longer term. And there are questions about whether that's going in the right direction.
Hmm.
And so the Fed took a bit of a flyer last week and cut interest rates by a quarter of a point, even though inflation is still problematic.
Mm,
And usually when inflation is problematic, they would hold.
hmm.
But there is this offsetting or this other concern about the job market,
Hmm.
and they decided to err in the favor of supporting the job market, and hopefully inflation will not become a
Well,
problem.
well, that's what President Trump wants, right? Lower interest rates.
He wants lower interest rates. That he thinks interest rates should be at 1%.
Hmm.
We're at 4, and that's just unrealistic, because if the economy were so great,
Hmm.
you wouldn't want very low interest rates. You would
Mm.
want a higher interest rate just to keep things from getting out of control.
So it is December, the holiday season.
Mhm.
How do you think holiday spending? Where do you think that will end up?
It looks like it's going okay. It really does. It hasn't really gone into the tank or anything like that. And I always find, I remember, and this is going way back, 1987, after the market crashed, and people thought that the holiday season was going to be a bust, and it wasn't.
Mm,
And we're nowhere near having that kind of shock
that's
of a
right.
1987.
That's right.
So people tend to just like you said, they kind of shop their blues away or ignore their concerns and go out and buy.
More of my conversation with Larry Edelman after this short break. So, Larry, let's zoom in on Massachusetts. The economy already seems slower than the rest of the country. And a big factor, like you said earlier, is Trump threatening to cut federal research grants at universities and hospitals. In particular, he's taken aim at Harvard and MIT. So, how bad could it get here?
Well, clearly, the actions that the president has taken so far have really, you know, disproportionately impacted the economy in New England, because we are so dependent on higher education and healthcare and biomedical research, and that has put a chill in the higher ed hiring. The big schools are all either freezing or cutting hiring, freezing or cutting budgets,
Hmm.
and that's going to start to ripple throughout the economy.
I think it already has.
Yeah.
I mean, what's one thing, it's a little confusing to me because, Harvard, for example, is, you know, Trump has threatened to cut its research funding, significantly. And then Harvard is sued, right? And then they've won in court. But it's unclear to me if, did they lose their money or not? But it seems like even the threat of research cuts is spooking, right? Universities, that they're just cutting anyways. They're trying to get ahead of it. That's what seems a lot. And then they're afraid to spend. I mean, that's what
Right.
seems like
Yeah.
what's
I was
going
just
on.
talking to our colleague, Jonathan Saltzman, who's been on this beat of what's happening in higher ed and medical research. And he says that people are really nervous. They're hunkering down. He was talking to one researcher who knows he's going to be losing his job
Oh,
in
wow.
June,
Wow.
and is really keeping spending under control. He's optimistic that he'll get another job, but not sure. So, that is where the kind of dominoes start to tumble. Harvard cuts back, and MIT cuts back, and BU. And that sends a shockwave through the economy. People go out to dinner less. People shop less. People don't, renovate their kitchen. They put that on hold. People may not buy that new car, that kind of stuff.
I mean, do you think we're like maybe if I can use a baseball analogy, like which inning are we in? Are we at the, are we midway through or just the very beginning? Like where are we in this cycle of, federal cuts?
That's a good question, Shirley, and I'm not 100% sure, but I would say we're at least halfway through. I think the administration came out of the box with that shock and awe type of strategy. Now they've hit resistance.
That's right, with the lawsuits.
With a lot of lawsuits, and it seems to me that the emphasis has turned elsewhere right now. That they're falling back to what they know plays well with the base, and that is really focusing on immigration and social issues. And whenever the president starts making war noises, things are going bad because he's trying to divert attention away from the economy.
Right.
And let's face it, his poll numbers have dropped, consumer confidence numbers have dropped. So
people don't think he has a good handle on the economy, right?
Right. And one of the things that I'd say that is a reason for that is that he refuses to admit obvious problems. It's one thing you take political issues like subsidies for healthcare, and you can muddy the waters and kind of spin it the way you want to see it. But when you tell people that affordability is a hoax, a Democratic con job, and they're struggling, they know you're giving them a bunch of BS. Judge Judy wrote a book called "Don't Pee on My Leg and Tell Me It's Raining," and that's exactly what the president is doing to the American people right now. He's telling them it's not, affordability isn't a problem, and they know damn well it is.
So even before these federal research cuts, I felt like the Massachusetts economy was already teetering, right? With the shrinking labor pool, people moving out of state, because of the high costs and fewer immigrants. I mean, how can this be fixed? Because I guess my point is there were already underlying issues even before, Trump threatened or Trump cut research.
Yeah. I mean, Massachusetts has a competitiveness problem. We have high costs, and it's expensive to live here, and the weather isn't great compared to other places, as we know, like going outside today. And so it was an issue before Trump. What's going on now is some of the pillars, and you've written about this, are eds and meds, are under stress. Eds and meds makes the Massachusetts economy, right? And without them, the engine just really starts to sputter. So I think that the challenges that are twofold. One is to keep improving the competitive positioning of Massachusetts. Avoiding the impulse to raise taxes so that you can make up lost revenue, and focus on things like that aren't sexy, like utility costs. I mean, that's a real big, a big concern.
Energy and healthcare.
Energy, healthcare, and unemployment insurance. The unemployment insurance system in this state is a mess. It's very expensive, and the governor has promised to do something about it, but is moving at a very slow pace.
So in 2025, one of the watchwords was affordability. Right. So do you think the cost of everything, will that continue to be a big issue in 2026?
You got to look at affordability in a couple of pieces. One of them is what's the inflation rate? At what pace are prices actually increasing? And that seems to be a problem that could be resolved in that I think as the economy slows a bit and, it doesn't need a recession, the rate of inflation will drop closer towards 2%, especially if we don't get any more tariffs. But you're now looking at prices that since this start of the pandemic are up 25%. That's just harder because people's incomes are barely keeping up with that. Then I think you have to zero in on specifics like healthcare and childcare and housing costs. And those things could continue to rise because we really haven't seen any major progress on bringing those things down.
Mhm.
And so the overall rate of inflation may moderate, go back to where it was before we had this terrible outbreak, but people will still be struggling with those basic necessities of life.
Mhm.
And that's what really puts the day-to-day strain on people, and the stress of, coming up with those child care payments and, making the car payments, that kind of thing.
During the 2024 election, we all talked about inflation, right, and how that was driving up the cost of everything.
Mhm.
And it's almost like then we stopped talking about inflation, but then we talked about affordability, but it was really the same theme,
Right.
right?
Affordability is just what's left after inflation stops increasing
Mm,
at a rapid pace,
mm.
you know? And
So
prices rarely go down.
right. They
Yeah.
never go down.
Yeah.
They just
They
stay
do
high.
sometimes, like, yeah, energy prices fluctuate,
Right,
and, electronics, just get better and,
right.
cheaper, but, no, mostly prices go up.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about a recent column you wrote. You had this hot take about Gen Z and baby boomers and how they have more in common than we think. So why did you write about that?
Well, because I was thinking about what it's like. I mean, I have Gen Z kids, or
Hmm.
one Gen Z kid, two or more, I guess, in the millennial
Hmm.
cohort. But it's tough. You know what I mean? My son, who's 28, is working remotely. He lives in New York City, but he's
Hmm.
got a Boston employer, and he doesn't go into the office, and
Hmm.
and he's cost of living in New York is really high, and there's not a lot of opportunity to find new jobs at higher salaries. The hiring has dried up, and so I was just thinking, what was it like when I was his age?
Hmm.
And we had like I said, the first real defining moment in my professional career was the crash of '87,
That's right.
and that looked really bleak.
Yeah.
And I walked out of the house the day after that happened and told my wife, I said, don't be surprised if it gets really ugly in terms of like more
Mm,
losses and people just crying,
right.
that the sky is falling. Gratefully, it didn't. But by the end of the year, as I said, things were pretty much back to normal.
Mm,
And then we were, I moved up to Boston in '89, and we had a terrible recession in
hmm. That's
Massachusetts.
right.
And the value of my house, we bought a house in December of 1989.
Hmm.
And by June of the following year, the value was down like 20%.
Wow.
20% drop
Wow.
on house prices.
Wow.
And so, uh, you know, you after you've lived through these things, you tend to have more perspective on
Yeah.
it. And I just wanted to convey to Gen Z that things may look pretty bad at times, and they
Mm,
will be bad at times.
right.
But for the most part, at least up until now, the country has managed to make it through. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? And come back even stronger.
Hmm. So when we look ahead to 2026, what are the kind of big economic moments there that you are keeping an eye on?
I think AI is the number one thing to keep an
Mm,
eye on. First and foremost, whether the um, optimism that we've
mm,
seen and the increase in valuations of these
mhm.
private companies,
Because that's
OpenAI,
what's driving up the stock
yeah,
market, right?
it's driving up the stock market. Whether that persists, whether
Mhm.
that continues, or whether we see a setback like we did with the
Mm,
dot-com.
that's right.
Now, the stock market is not the real economy.
Mhm.
But it can have an impact if people don't feel as wealthy as they used to.
Mhm.
Those upper end people who've been supporting the economy may cut back.
Mhm.
Uh, the other aspect of AI is what impact it will have on jobs.
Yep.
And you're already starting to hear that
Mhm.
employers are being more cautious because they're just waiting to
Right.
see how the implementation of
Right.
AI goes before they hire
Right.
real people.
Well, you're hearing about with the holiday season, right? Used to be there was a lot of hiring, right, during of workers during the holiday season, but I
Mhm.
think some of them have been replaced by robots in the warehouses now.
Yes, yeah.
And so, and some of a lot of the big companies are trying to replace workers, at all levels, right,
Hmm. Hmm.
with AI.
Yeah. So AI is definitely going to be a big issue in 2026. And I also think that, 2026 will be when we see whether the job market is merely like slowing down a bit and just kind of catching its breath, or whether we have a more serious downturn.
Mhm.
So I'll be watching jobs numbers, wage numbers very closely.
We have a new Fed chair?
We will have a new Fed chair in May. Yes, that's when Jerome Powell steps down.
And he's definitely out.
He is definitely out as chairman, but
Yes.
the question remains whether his term as a governor, as one of the 7 governors, doesn't end until 2028.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, so he could stay on as a governor.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
by tradition, Fed chairs have typically just left the Fed altogether after they're done with their term as.
He seems like he would like to keep fighting with Trump.
Well, that will be an indicator, actually. I heard a podcast, Mark Zandi, the renowned economist, was talking, and he was saying that will be an indicator of whether there's concern that the Fed is losing its independence as Trump adds more and more people.
Then he should stay. Of course it's losing its independence. He's going to have control, right?
Right.
In 2026?
No, he won't have absolute control. He'll have more members. He's got 3 people right now.
How many members of the board?
There's 7.
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
he's got 3 already.
Yeah.
And then the chair.
Yeah, he's got them, but 2 of them, they're like Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
Once they get in the position, once they get into the job, they don't necessarily go the way that the president who appointed them intended.
I see.
And certainly wasn't the case with Powell. I mean, Trump put Powell in that job, and he complained about him ever since.
Right. There is, speaking of the Supreme Court, there is a big tariff case, right?
Yes.
That's heading to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Whether or not Trump's tariffs are legal.
Right. Some of them. The ones, the reciprocal tariffs that he used using something called the Emergency Powers Act. That's not the official name of it, but that's the shorthand that I remember at this point in time. But and the Supreme Court is going to rule whether or not tariffs using that statute are constitutional. And there is some feeling that they may not. And that could really throw things up in the air. What does he do with the tariffs that have already been collected? Does he have to refund them?
Well, some companies like Costco are suing, right, to get their tariffs back.
Exactly.
Tariff money back.
Exactly.
So, well, Larry, this has been great. And I hope that you have a good holiday. And may there be many viral trendline newsletters in your future in 2026. Larry Edelman is a business columnist who writes Trendlines, one of the globe's most popular newsletters. It's out every Monday and Thursday. We'll post a link in our show notes so you can read it. You can also sign up for free at bostonglobe.com/newsletters/trendlines. Thanks so much, Larry, for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Shirley. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Say More is a production of the Boston Globe. This episode was produced by Anna Kusmer. Our editor is Jim Dow. Our engineer is Zuzair Ahmed. If you like the show, please follow us and leave us a review. You can email us at saymore@globe.com. I'm Shirley Leung. Thanks for listening.